Hi, Jimmy. It's another Jimmy on stage.
Hello, hello.
So I'm going to start by doing this. Obviously, when we announced you as a speaker at the conference, some BSV supporters across the ecosystem got, I think, a little, ahead of themselves and automatically assumed that meant you were going to come here and say, "Oh, I love BSV and it's going to help Wikipedia." Clearly, that's not your opinion, which you've made clear online. So I do want to ask about some specific types of use cases people talk about for use of Bitcoin with all kinds of online information sources. But before I do that, and we do that in an organized fashion, I thought I'd give you a few minutes to talk about what you've told me by phone, which is, yes, you've looked at use of Bitcoin and Wikipedia for a long time and have concluded that it's not useful for your purposes. So you want to explain to our audience?
Sure, yeah, great. So I think one of the important things that people working in this space need to understand is that people who have been doing things for a very long time, quite successfully, actually have thought about things for a very long time quite successfully. And not every solution that immediately pops into your head would actually work. And this is something that I've seen again and again and again, not just with blockchain, Bitcoin, but all manner of things. I remember in the very early days of Wikipedia, it was suggested that rather than using a standard server farm, that we run somehow in a distributed manner, running on all kinds of different people's computers and things like that. And I thought, oh, that's actually very interesting, but let's actually think about that. And ultimately said, look, without running code, this is not an idea that actually works at all. It's a concept or a vision for the future. And today, when we look at a lot of this, and we can talk through some specific use cases that people commonly propose, but one of the things that I like to remind people is that if you take something that is already a bad idea and put it on the blockchain, it doesn't actually necessarily make it a good idea. If the reasons that it's a bad idea remain true regardless, then sort of having a new form of payment mechanism isn't really the answer.
Blockchain doesn't cure it.
It doesn't cure it, exactly. So a typical kind of thing that people say is, what if users could pay the writers directly through the system and somehow. And this is a really bad idea. It's an idea that doesn't actually work.
Yeah. Let's focus on that. Tell us why.
So for example, right now the typical problem that we face already that we have to cope with is paid advocacy editors. So people who come onto Wikipedia, not with the standard sort of choose love incentive structure of Wikipedia, where people come because they're passionate about knowledge, they're passionate about getting it right. We always talk about reliable sources, and most of what Wikipedians spend their time doing is chewing over the sources and trying to neutrally present information. And then you have a different type of editor who is there basically as an advocate. They come in and they just say, I don't actually care about the truth, I'm being paid to make this company look good. And we detect those. It's imperfect, but we do detect those and we ban them. And people do get banned from Wikipedia quite often for this type of behavior. And so creating a mechanism where you actually authenticate that type of behavior, power it, this is a really bad idea. This isn't something that's going to help with the quality of Wikipedia at all. It means that the entry on the Exxon Valdez is going to be paid for by Exxon. And that, unless you can solve that problem, you're definitely taking a step back. You're going to have a very spam-filled problematic wiki. Now, I'm not saying that problem is impossible to solve, but it's a huge, hairy problem. Sure. And blockchain doesn't help solve it, because that's already a problem. We could set up some sort of a payment mechanism without blockchain. You just come on the site and put in your money, and then it gets paid out to editors or whatever. So that's one example. Another example, people say,
before
look,
you get to your next example,
okay.
let me ask Craig what he thinks about that particular example, which is, do you think, Craig, that Bitcoin can be used effectively to have users pay a writer to edit, contribute to Wikipedia?
Yes, I do, but I think it comes down to reputation and ensuring pseudonymous identity that is actually mapped out to individuals and not just sort of presented as they're an expert, but rather puts their partisan or non-partisan type views. Right now, I mean, one of the problems I see with Wikipedia as a former academic is there are a lot of inaccuracies, not necessarily in the referencing, but the quality of the referencing. So just because a lot of people agree with a topic doesn't make it true. And you can actually edit and have a false presentation of things. I mean, the creationist sort of lobbies, a lot of their things are, we put out a number of sort of references, but we exclude references. And by hiding references and not putting them into an article and not actually allowing the research to show all the opposing sides, you're actually slanting something and still obscuring the truth.
Okay. I mean, I agree with, absolutely. I mean, one of the things about Wikipedia is that we have always avoided voting as a mechanism. That's another one, sort of pre-blockchain, pre-everything else. It's a very tempting path that people think you should go down, is to say, let people vote on two versions of an article, which is better, or whether to include this line or not. And that doesn't really work, because truth is not a question of the views of the majority. The truth is a question of the quality of the sources. So actually, on a subject like creationism, I think, you know, if you go to our entries on scientific research about evolution, we do not have a separate paragraph that says, oh, and by the way, a bunch of religious nutcases disagree and have written a bunch of nonsense about this. We just say, actually, that's not quality work, and that's not science, and that's not. Now, we will also cover the creationist point of view by simply saying, well, here's what they say, and here's the arguments put forward. And so you have to do all those things. That kind of work is very, it's very human. So one of the things that, again, another topic where domain experts who don't understand how Wikipedia works come in and say, well, what if AI could write Wikipedia? And I'm like, well, by the time an AI can write a Wikipedia entry, there's a whole other set of things going on, because we're basically at the singularity, right? That's a human level intelligence. That's not to say AI can't help in various pieces of the puzzle, but it's those kind of very subtle judgments about the quality of sourcing and the interaction, and are you accurately and fairly representing things, that's just a really, the best way possible is an open dialogue between thoughtful people who may not agree on everything, but who are committed to the idea that truth is what we're after here.
So before I asked Craig to comment earlier, you were about to talk about a second example that you often hear about in terms of people proposing Bitcoin use for Wikipedia that you think is not effective. Tell us.
One proposal that people make that sounds tempting at first is to say, well, gee, right now there's zero cost to go on Wikipedia and put in some misinformation. And what if you charged people to edit? Or they at least put some coin at risk with an edit, and then if it gets reverted, they may lose their coin and so on. And this sounds tempting, right? Except it doesn't work, because it means that the people who are willing to put coin at risk, because they've got coin to put at risk, will do so. They will often win those debates. Whereas some of the best work in Wikipedia, some of the fantastic stuff is just some random person who has a deep interest in, I mean, one of my favorite type of examples is Wiki Project Bridges, which is all about all the bridges, suspension bridges in the world. And this group of people, they look at all of the famous bridges and they talk about the architecture and the history of the bridges and the length and all this sort of, it's really super geeky stuff. These people are doing it because of a love of that topic. They're not doing it in any sort of competitive way. To say to them, you're going to have to pay or put money at risk in order to edit Wikipedia is completely insane. These are just nice people writing about bridges, and they're not doing anything bad, and they don't need money, and they're not interested in that. And in fact, it could seriously harm that ecosystem if you thought, oh, charging people to edit Wikipedia would be a good idea.
Craig, is there an actually effective, practical way for something like Wikipedia to charge people to edit and still have it be reliable?
That's not an area I'm sort of an expert in right at the moment, but the way I'd look at it would be you could earn money on the site generally,
okay.
Rather than donations. There could be different payment mechanisms where micropayments enable you to sort of charge on use.
So you're talking about charging to read?
To read, yes.
Okay.
But also where people update things and find errors. If they could provably show that over time, that maybe would be somewhere. Or find out extra sources of information, not just because the crowds believe in them, but because it's actually been demonstrated by other people who have then done a review of all that information and linked it. So once again, identity is going to be an important part of this going forward. Not, as everyone says, I need my name, but being able to create pseudonymous identities that gain reputation. So we were talking upstairs about people in New York who have their identity, they're trusted. Why? Because they've been using the same identity over many years, as you've been saying. And just not putting your name out there doesn't make identity. People can have identity because you use the same sort of login, the same page, the same whatever else over time. So being able to build up reputation over time and own that is something as well, and being able to have people show where you have partisan beliefs and report those should be part of it.
So if we take that concept and move off of Wikipedia, I think there is definitely something very interesting in that. So at Wikipedia, I've always been a huge fan and advocate of pseudonymity. Like pseudonymity for us does almost all of the heavy lifting that you would expect from a real names policy. If you have a stable identity that gains trust over time, and people do, I mean, because you have a login and a password, and you can prove you are who you say you are. You know, there you are, and that really works quite well. We have some amazing contributors who we don't actually know who they are, but we know they're good contributors because their work is all transparent. Everything is there in the history. You can read it. You can see it. They've interacted with people. People say, oh, you know, this person is really good at coming in to help mediate a dispute. This person really knows their sources on Elizabethan poetry, whatever it might be. And that's very, very powerful, and it's something that we don't really have very well in most places on the internet. So on Twitter, as an example, a place I think is quite toxic. This was,
Yes,
everybody
we
thought
know.
we were going to be at each other's throats, but we definitely agreed on one thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Twitter is toxic. And one of the reasons for that, of course, you can go on Twitter and have a pseudonym that gains trust and followers over time by doing good stuff. But Twitter also makes it incredibly easy to have throwaway troll accounts.
Yes.
And it's a large part of, it's not the only thing that contributes to the toxicity of Twitter, but it's, you know, basically, if you want to harass a person, right, a troll normally can't come on, although as is clear, it's possible to buy followers and all of that. They've got a really broken system in lots of ways. But a troll normally can't just, you sign up for an account on Twitter and you start tweeting some trolling nonsense, and basically no one's going to see it because you've got 0 followers. But if it's targeted harassment, it's quite easy to get it in front of the people you want to harass and to inflame them. And ultimately, I think there's a huge business model problem. That sort of trolling and flame wars and things like that, I mean, we all have to admit there's a piece of us. You know, there's the very famous web comic. Someone's partner is saying, you know, come to bed, honey, and he says, I can't. Someone is wrong on the internet, you know, and I think many of us have been up at 2 a.m. and I need to go to bed, but there's somebody wrong on Twitter, and I've got to sort them out right now. And so
Craig used to do that a lot.
their business model really doesn't
wrong.
dissuade them from, you know, they kind of like having a huge flame war, a rolling, ongoing flame war. It results in more page views, more ads, and so on. And then just to remember, that's very different from the business model, if you want to call it that. Wikipedia is a charity, of course. Sure. But our business model is you pay if you want to. Like everyone in this room, probably many people have donated to Wikipedia over the years. You don't have to. Don't really mind if you do or you don't. I mean, I hope you do, but that's great. What that means is for the organization, what does our incentive structure look like? We know the only reason anybody gives money to Wikipedia is because they say, you know what, this makes the world a better place. This makes my life better. There's something meaningful here, and I want to contribute to that. And then to make it available freely for everyone on the planet, to have free access to some of all human knowledge, that's our goal. So if we're thinking, you know, in the office about a new feature or something like that, we never think, gee, we need more clickbait headlines, right? Wikipedia doesn't have clickbait headlines. The headline will be Craig Wright, you know, that's the headline, right? Not a juicy sort of clickbaity sort of thing. There's a lot of things where we just say, yeah, we're not interested in just increasing the number of page views just for the sake of it. What we're interested in is You come to Wikipedia, you have a meaningful experience, and then sometime in the year you go, you know what, I should chip in.
So Craig, what do you have to say about that, which is the concept that if you charge users to access and read Wikipedia articles, maybe then it creates perverse incentives to make them more scintillating, that more people will click to pay, which might affect your suggestion of, having users pay a small amount, let's say a Bitcoin, to read something?
Again, it depends on what the incentive structure is that you design. So there's nothing saying that you can't have an opt-in policy. One of the things, I've donated in the past to Wikipedia. It has a definite role in the internet and whatever else. I would like to see certain things improved, I'll admit that. As an academic, I used to tell students, you can't just rely on Wikipedia, as we all do, because too many do. But I'd like to see something where I can just set up a payment structure where instead of having a credit card every now and again and going through all the mess of PayPal and etc., who take a chunk of my money anyway not to give to you, I would rather just, as it happens, a small amount goes. And that can be optional. And I could set the amount each time I see a page. Every time I use a page, every time I like a page, I could actually do that and choose because I'm donating. I could say every time I see a Wikipedia page that I like, I pay a cent. It may not seem much, but that would be actually probably more than I'm donating when they bring up their thing now. And I could potentially even then sort of donate to other people in different areas. I could open up access to people who are in third world countries and specifically say, I'd like to be able to give these people money to give to Wikipedia, saying what they do and don't like. And I could open that up, allowing people to start showing what features they'd like to say and where they'd like Wikipedia to concentrate more on and that sort of thing.
Craig, in your example of what I'll call micro-donations, right, to Wikipedia, particular posts or donations, who would get the money? Only Wikipedia or people who contributed to the post or edited it?
That could be any model they like. I mean, I would not say to Wikipedia, this is how you need to do it. I mean, I'd be quite happy for Wikipedia just to take donations to Wikipedia. And whether editors or whatever else stay exactly the same. I don't think I should dictate at all to how Jimmy is going to run his community. I mean, I think that would be wrong. I think he knows his community better, and it's not my place to tell him how to do that. But I'd love to be able to see a way of easily giving him money. I mean...
Right. So,
Jimmy, what do you think about that idea of micro-donations by
point-
post that are voluntary?
yeah,
right?
so right now at Wikipedia, we accept donations in whatever, tons and tons of different currencies through traditional methods, PayPal, credit cards, whatever, JCB, all of the different ways that we can. And obviously we want it to be easy for people to donate money. And so where I stand on that is to say, look, now that we're not talking about putting Wikipedia on the blockchain per se, but we're just saying...
We're going to get to that.
I think we already dealt with that, but if we're just saying, look, is it good for content producers? Now, let's talk about newspapers, let's talk about this, to have easy ways for people to give money that are as low cost, frictionless as possible. Of course it is, right? And so when we look at that sort of thing, we look at it in a very, very pragmatic way because it's not ideological for us at all. We want everybody in the room to give us money. That's important to us. And basically, I remember, again, going many, many, many years ago, people haranguing me, you should accept e-gold. And we looked into it and we're like, yeah, but nobody has it. Nobody's using it. Sure. It's not something that's practical. And we do accept Bitcoin now and Ethereum and so on, and there's regulatory reasons we use, I think, Coinbase. I can't remember exactly how we do it, but we go through somebody because we, blah, blah, blah. It's all very boring. But the point is, we're happy for people to do that, and we would be happy if there were a mechanism that were popular, and we see there's a new payment method that's getting popular, people are wanting to do it, then obviously we'll let them do it. And so that I have no objection to that, but for right now, if you said, well, what we have seen, and this is actually probably something that will pass in time, we did some A/B testing where we throw up the sort of donation thing and we say, donate, you can use a credit card, you can use PayPal, you can donate Bitcoin. And it turned out our actual revenue declined when we did that. Actually, we brought in less total money, less from all three sources. And the reason, I believe, is because people are like, ooh, Bitcoin, that's interesting. And they click and they go and they read about it and they think about, oh, I should do that, but I don't have any Bitcoin. How do I get Bitcoin? And the next thing you know, they're bored and they go do something else. They got distracted. So obviously, if it became something where everybody is using a certain payment mechanism that's just a one-click thing, then obviously we're going to look at that and evaluate it the same way we would evaluate, if there were a large competitor to PayPal. So things like Google Pay, Amazon payments, things like that. We evaluate them all and we say, okay, well, look, does it actually work? Does it bring in money? So there's no opposition on that level because that's really quite straightforward. If it's a payment mechanism that works, then we'll do it. Right now, I think we all have to concede, after 11 years, we don't yet have the consumer acceptance. We don't yet have the mechanisms. My father, we used to always say my mother, and people decided that was sexist. In my case, I don't say my mother couldn't do it, because my mother probably could. She's the tech geek of the family. But my father, he had Bitcoin. It's all very confusing to him. How am I supposed to get it? What would I have to do? What encryption? I don't really know what that is, and so on. So until that barrier is crossed, that we have consumer mechanisms that everybody just can use and understand just as easily as they understand any other sort of form of payment, then, for a large site that's looking to bring in a lot of money, we don't want to distract people when they're in the middle of checkout.
So I was going to say, right now, as easy as a swipe because of things like PayMail, Sentry, whatever else, I have my hand cash wallet, and I have earned over the last few months, since the upgrade of that, £9.63, with the average random person sending me about 0.1 cent at a time. So I'm just sitting there going, oh, look, I've earned under a cent, honey. And she goes, that's nice.
So, Jimmy, on that note, I'm actually glad you expressed that, because I'm going to ask you to consider something on behalf of the Bitcoin SV community. Because we are the community that's actually trying to address all of the roadblocks that you've identified. And so, as the BSV ecosystem grows and more BSV gets into the hands of users through ways that are not about buying coins on an exchange, through just daily use, in a few years, I'm going to ask you to look at BSV again and see whether or not you'd be interested in having micro-donations capabilities on every page, because there are buttons with the BSV ecosystem where you could just instantly donate a small amount, not $1 or $10. Why it hasn't happened before with BTC is the slowness of the network and the high transaction fees, so no one can donate a cent or 2 cents because they liked a particular page. That's going to be possible with BSV, and the people in this room are creating the user-friendly interfaces to make that possible. And once that becomes more widely spread with BSV in the hands of more people in the world, I'm going to ask you in a couple years to look and see whether that might be useful for Wikipedia. What would you think?
Yeah, I think that's right. I'm skeptical as to whether we'll get there.
Sure. That's our job.
I actually felt like, one of the things. And I don't know the current status of it. I don't even know what it was ever all about. I don't watch every detail in this space. But like Facebook Libra, and I just thought they're not the right company to be doing this. If I can say this, get Amazon to adopt something. If Amazon adopts it, loads and loads and loads of people will use it, and then it becomes more consumer friendly, and then it's something that we could do. But yeah, at that level, I would say, we just look at that in a very pragmatic way. It's just like, okay, look, if we can bring in money, we'll bring in money. That sounds great, yeah.
Great, so let's talk about one thing you were starting to mention, which is this use case I hear about a lot, as I'm sure you do, which is, well, because the blockchain is an immutable data ledger, a record of history, wouldn't it be useful for Wikipedia to have on the blockchain all of the prior versions of posts so people could see changes over time and how they're made? You don't think that's a good idea? Tell us why.
Yeah, I don't see the benefit of it. So right now, one of the things that is really important about blockchain in general is the lack of a need for a trusted third party. But in this case, we are the trusted third party. We host the database, we maintain the database. We have very specific and strict rules about how different user accounts can interact with the database. And one of the things that is really important to us and should be really important to any kind of service like ours is the ability to remove abuse, the ability to remove child porn and things like this, and actually remove it. And that's really important. And a lot of the sort of the threat models that people have in mind of, us secretly deleting pages or something like that, it's just like, well, we're not doing that, so we don't see any benefit of that. Nobody actually is seriously worried about that. As somebody said on Twitter the other day, well, what if you could bribe an administrator to delete a page? And it would be like, well, that would be publicly viewable, and another admin would just restore it immediately, and that admin would lose their privileges and so on and so forth. And so it becomes, for us, that immutability, it has a lot of potential downsides, but not much upsides. And things like backups, we have a very sensible backup strategy. We offer, because everything is open source, right? Many people mirror Wikipedia, so there are many, there's no existential threat to the planet that somebody's gonna get on our servers and delete Wikipedia and like, oh my God, now Wikipedia's gone. No, there's tons of backups everywhere. That's all quite straightforward. And so we haven't seen any use case that makes that worthwhile, and the immutability is actually a big problem for us. And once you get rid of immutability as a desired end, then, as I said on Twitter the other day, I think it's my most popular tweet ever, is we store data in a database. It works well. And so there's got to be a really compelling reason, right, to move into something like that. Now, that's us, right? That's our use case. I do think there's a lot of super interesting possibilities in other use cases where, there may not be a trusted middle party. There may, and there's lots of different interesting work going on out there. But for us, it's like, no, we don't see any need for that.
Craig, how would you respond to that?
I think what you're doing is misunderstanding the nature of Bitcoin. There's a lot of misinformation. Bitcoin does not remove the need for trusted third parties, full stop. It removes the need for trusted third parties in small micropayments. Internet intermediaries cost too much. They don't allow you to have micropayments. If you're transferring $1 million worth of BTC, Ethereum, Litecoin, you need a trusted third party, full stop. There's no way on earth that you can get out without know your customer regulations. There's no way that you can do this otherwise. All this idea that Bitcoin utterly removes all this is wrong. It is basically a bunch of criminals wanting money laundering and other such things. If you want to transfer large amounts of Bitcoin, Ethereum, Litecoin, anything else, then quite simply, you have to have identity brokers. You have to record all this information by law. The anti-terrorist funding regulations say funding. And in the Liberty Reserve case, they came up, like Badowski, et cetera, argued it's cryptocurrency, it doesn't apply. And the judge was very, very sort of open on this, and he said, the law says funding. He didn't care whether it was cryptocurrencies, he didn't care whether it was cash, he didn't care whether it was bank accounts, he didn't care whether it was watches. If you fund an account, you're required to follow the law. So that is part of it. But immutable doesn't mean everyone gets to see it. So the structure of Bitcoin was such that you can actually restrict access to certain files, you can actually still have all of that, and you can script things such that data can be immutable. If someone posts child porn, it can be recorded as an evidential system. You can then link it to a digital signature, trace people back, hand them to the police, but simultaneously lock the file, leave it encrypted on chain as an evidence source, so the people trying to abuse the system by loading illegitimate, illicit material go to jail.
As we're getting close to the end of our time, I wanted to give Jimmy an opportunity. Are there any other particular proposed uses of Bitcoin or any cryptocurrency that you think this audience should know just won't be effective? And I think we would take this moment to clarify, I think your feelings that you're expressing are not unique to BSV. It's just the variety of cryptocurrencies that are out there.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that, I think we've covered the major ones that I often hear with Wikipedia, and I've explained why we don't see those as useful for us. And what I would see as potentially useful is just easier payment mechanisms. Of course, that's always a great thing. In general, though, what I would suggest is that the same structural problem that we have here probably exists in many, many other areas. So I once had a chat with someone who they were very keen on using blockchain in the art world. To trace the provenance of fraud and so on and so forth. And I'm not an expert in that domain. I don't know, but I immediately saw, gee, there's some really huge problems with that because most of the problems in that area don't have to do with a lack of immutable ledger and tracking and so forth. Most of the problems have to do with people painting fake paintings and selling them, right? And so it's not clear how blockchain actually helps with that problem. And you have to be really careful to not, I mean, it's a very old saying, of course, if the only thing you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And to realize that there will be many potential attempts to use blockchain in a certain domain where actually once you try it, you realize this doesn't actually solve the problem. Like that's not where the problem lies. Because it's not that every problem in the world is a problem because we don't have blockchain, right? And so I think that is the caution I would give to any entrepreneur in this is really check yourself and say, look, am I just, and I think many people have had this experience. This is the last thing I'm going to say. Guy came to me, he sounded very interesting. We had a long meeting, and I sort of told him why I didn't think this worked. And basically what he said to me is like, but Jimmy, with your reputation, if you launch, this is back when ICOs were all the rage. If you did an ICO, you could probably raise 100 million. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not at a point in my life where
Could have had WikiCoin.
I need my legacy to be, I just defrauded the public of 100 million with some bullshit idea, right? It's not necessary, right?
So, Craig, very quickly, any other ideas you have for how Wikipedia or other information sources online could be improved?
I'll say something else. I mean, the art example. I actually worked on that when I was a auditor doing anti-fraud work with BDO. And it's not just painting a painting. That's a misconstruction of what it is. It's actually creating the records and documents around the painting. The painting's the easy bit. There are many artists who can copy particular, like Rembrandts or whatever else, and make so-called fake ones and whatever else. The ledger is the issue. That's generally where they get caught up. They try and create fake documents, fake transfers, fake history. Now, if you have a fake history that's only going back, say, 12 months, and this painting is 300 years old, and all of your transfer documents and ledgers and ownership records are under 12 months, that's how you catch these people. So if you have a ledger that proves that painting is at least 200 years old, then you have a starting point. And we can't do that yet because blockchain's not 200 years old. Right. But going forward, as we start recording things, that's where we have a point in time. We have a notarized service that can't be changed. So that's really how we start capturing it. So understanding the problem is part of this. And like you say, we can't do this. Of course we can. I mean, I actually worked on a few cases in Australia where people were doing art fraud. And they were always caught, not because of the painting. They were caught because of the ledgers, the journals, and the records.
All right. Good time. So, final question for Craig. While you have Jimmy Wales here, what would you like changed on your Wikipedia page? Or the Wikipedia, it's not your Wikipedia page, the Wikipedia page about you.
Interestingly enough, a few days ago, one of the more respected Wikipedia guys went in there and has actually updated it and made it a lot less biased and corrected a lot. So,
So you don't scream at the computer as much when you see it. Yeah.
yeah, so I won't actually say that now because they've made it a lot more accurate, although they still sort of have problems where paid forward pieces are more sort of widely respected than university pieces, but hey, that's a different thing.
So it still says you're on Grindr.
I haven't checked. I'm sure Jimmy ran and actually had a look, isn't he?
Yeah. It's going to be a fun after party tonight. That's all I'm going to tell you. Anyways, I really want to thank both of you for this really fascinating and provocative conversation. And I think, Jimmy Wales, I think your thoughts actually have been very useful to this audience. And we all want to thank you as a community that uses Wikipedia and appreciates the availability of online information very much for your and your foundation's work to bring information to the world. Thank you. Round of applause. Thank you so much. That's great. Thank you.